Before I introduce our speaker tonight, I've been asked to make an announcement, which I'm about to do. We, the library, host free tax aid appointment to the AARP on upcoming Monday. I had no idea that that was so until about 3:30 this afternoon. It sounds like a great program. If you want to make an appointment for that purpose, please call the library and they will accommodate. That's the end of my announcement. The important stuff tonight is going to come out of the mouth of Seth, Singleton, political science professor, wide world traveler, and an extraordinarily alert and acute mind. His speech tonight is entitled America First Returns, Prospects for Democracy and Autocracy Against the World. Around the world. Either one word. Seth has taught, researched, and administered in universities in 8 nations that I've counted. Is that right? Have I missed any?
Got Mongolia in there?
Yes, I did. Yeah. 5 continents. Missed Antarctica, which is understandable, and Australia, which is far away.
It's like California.
Yeah, sure. His focus is on national and international conflict, political change, and accompanying violence. He was in Russia in the early 90s for the breakup of the USSR, and in Vietnam after General Westmoreland, participating in the creation of a new university. Seth's expertise and his wisdom are especially relevant to recent events in the United States and all over the world. Really fortunate that he's willing to share the news. Thank you, Seth.
Thank you. That was probably in excess. Rick, thank you so much. As far as I'm concerned, I'm here with my friends tonight. We want to have a conversation. And so, you're welcome to heckle at any point. Here, come on in. And we'll obviously open up for all kinds of questions and discussion when we're finished and whatever. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on outrage. We can all do that by ourselves. What I find useful, and maybe get beyond it in a little bit. So, moment I want, by habit, as well as by, persuasion, step back and try to figure out what the heck's going on. Because I'm not sure. And it'll be very clear from what I say tonight that I'm not sure. But it's worth doing that, before cranking up. I suspect I will crank up at some point, but I'm not sure exactly what. The moment this talk tonight is about the relation of the Trump administration to the world, and specifically to democracy and the rest of the world. But we're also going to end with a little code imperialism, which now has raised its ugly and large head in American policy, is something we're just catching up with. So it's probably worth talking about that as well. First part, I'll say a couple of things about what the world is. And we'll say a few things about where I think the Trump administration is and Trump is, and maybe a little foray into some things that have been going on elsewhere, such like Brazil and India and Myanmar, and then finally coming back and talking a bit It's looming period, seeing front and center month or so in the last 2 or 3 days. So let's go ahead. It's definitely a new world. And the most powerful country, which is the United States, seems ready to discard its policy of support for democracy, which has been in place since 1941. The Charter. The American public is enthusiastically nationalist, and the incoming administration is determined to pursue the self-interest of the United States, as Mr. Trump and his friends would define it, unconstrained by alliances or pro-democracy ideology. Americana is over. It's actually been over for quite some time, although the folks in Washington are just beginning to acknowledge it. Power is now multilateral in many countries. And watch out for a fudge here. Vladimir Putin will say he's for a multilateral world, or a multipolar. And what he means is one organized against the United States. He wants a great world confrontation, which will put Russia at the head of an anti-West alliance. China will provide the money. And by the way, the Chinese basically, they'll help out the Russians and buy up Russia in the process, but they're really having none of it. They don't want the Russians getting them in war. They'd rather just buy up the world and dominate the supply chains. But in Washington, the foreign policy establishment is always looking for new threatening super enemy, new dragon to fight and slay, a new great confrontation. And they're now talking about this China, Russia, North Korea, Iran alliance, new super threatening enemy. And I think that's not really the case. What we've got is lots of rising countries and some declining ones, like Russia and Iran. My favorite metaphor where the world actually is at the moment is the bumper cars at the amusement park. Now, I don't know how many of you, went to the amusement park and get your car. It's got bumper and everybody else. And of course, we're the biggest bumper car. That's really the way the world is now starting. Trump is obviously welcomed by those who want to return to national interest and to a world based on might makes right. We'll come around to that again at the end. And he's opposed by those who cling to the dream of 1945, world peace, non-aggression, international community, global economy, for better or worse. That dream has hit its use-by date. Doesn't mean it was mistaken, but history has this habit of leaving old dreams in the dust. To a previous example, that's what happened to socialism and Marxism. Got left behind. Didn't mean it wasn't relevant. Basically got left behind. Okay. Now, the West is essentially on life support. And the West is a funny term, really funny term. It's actually a Cold War creation. There was no such thing as the West before the Second World War. There were a bunch of powers, including the Soviet Union, and the Americans were out there on the other side of their pond. And, they all bumped into each other in very nasty ways in the 20th century. And we're in a sense, now, Trump doesn't care two hoots about an alliance of democracies or about any alliance that the United States spend money on. The West may become the European Union and Canada, opposed to the United States. Well, that goes back to a much earlier time. It's nothing new. Since this last 75 years or so was a bit different, but it's now gone by. And of course, countries of the global south are a weaker West. If you want to know what the world really looks like, this is a wonderful graph. This is the world by economic size. Look at Russia. India's big, China's big. Europe put together is big. The United States is big. And all these regions and all the countries within them pretty much out economic interest. There is, by the way, no transnational ideology. And the effort to create a global liberal capitalist world under American patronage, the world that we saw from 1991 until recently, so-called unipolar moment, pretty much failed. The global south is becoming very important, and the Russians out there with Lavrov on the end are trying to horn in as the leader of it, but I don't think that's going to work all that well. And this is new. Actually, there are all kinds of interactions between and among these countries that really don't involve the United States much at all. The UN and its agencies are losing importance. So some of them, like the World Food Program and the World Health Organization, are essential. Trump or Elon Musk and Russell Vaught at the Office of Management and Budget will like to defund them. This is ideology dressed up as efficiency and cost cutting. Trump, by the way, hates international organizations. He's a nationalist to the core. And one of his first day acts was to take the United States out of the World Health Organization, along with the Paris climate change. Few Americans realize that the United States still pays about 30% of the entire UN costs, including things like the UNRWA, which has helped Palestinians ever since 1948, and the WTO, and all the rest. And you take 30% out of the UN budget, and it's pretty much going to go by the board because the Chinese no longer have the money to step in and take it over. There it is. Now, the narrative of the decline of the West, these are obviously from Trump's first term. We'll see if it's going to be different this time, but I don't think it is. Facing off against Angela Merkel and Putin genius and whatever. But anyway, that narrative of the decline of the West, in fact, masks something even more basic. And what's even more basic is that all the really so-called great powers are in really serious trouble. Russia is my favorite study. It's really fascinating in the place. They've been bled dry by their war of aggression in Ukraine. They're running out of people. They are offering bonuses to sign up as a contract soldier, which means you probably have life expectancy of 50% maybe for a month. Oh yeah. They're losing tremendous numbers of people. The Ukrainians claim that there were 150,000 Russian soldiers killed just last year. That's probably an exaggeration. Nevertheless, and as this goes on, they've retreated on further and further into what is a pretty good facsimile of fascism. The job of male people is to fight and die. Death is glorious. The job of female people is to have lots of babies so that they can, either have more babies or go out and fight and die. This is actually very explicit these days. And their economy is in really bad shape. Inflation is way up. 3% of their budget is of war production. The oil price keeps going down. The ruble is equal to 1 cent. And it's getting worse. Okay. This is not a country that's going to take over the world. Probably not even with Chinese money. And China. This is the data in graphic form from the Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences. This is not some anti-China think tank putting this stuff out. Current population basically has gone down a little years. Just hit its peak. Due to go down by half, 60 or 70 years. Nobody's having babies in China. We can talk a lot about why that's the case, but they're not. Thank you. What else? Well, by the way, this is the country that's going to, eat our lunch after, breakfast. I guess you eat lunch after breakfast or whatever. 20% unemployment, give or take, with university graduates. Just lying flat for non-university after you graduate. Meaning we're not going to bust our gut. We already did that, get into the university in the first place. Now there's no job for us. What's all this about? And she says, eat bitterness. It's an old phrase. We sacrificed in our generation. Now you have to do the same thing. Now, nobody's buying it. And they still got all their stuff. Yeah, the migrants from rural areas still do not have legitimate residence in cities. And there are hundreds of millions of them. And they have to, kids, if they're already living with grandparents, and it's a horrible, awful social mess. Now, 2 points about the United States. Okay. One is that, in fact, we have a foreign policy consensus in this country. We did. It may change with Trump. We'll see. We'll get back to that at the end. But it looked something like this. We're done with forever wars. We don't really want wars at all. No U.S. soldiers now in combat overseas. That's not quite true because there are a few of them out there in Syria, remnants in the middle of the fuss there. Gotten out of West Africa. But anyway, and we're going to protect our jobs and our workers. Anti-globalization. Maybe we'll try tariffs, whatever it is. We're not just going to let people like David Perdue, our new ambassador to China, ship jobs to China. Or Elon Musk, or whoever it happens to be. Strong military, no nation building, doesn't work. They don't build their own country, it's their own damn fault. No crusades for democracy or human rights. Keep the alliances. It's a consensus, but they darn well better pay their share. China, main adversary, maybe we're not quite sure. We'll keep TikTok. There's a lot of ambiguity, but the ambiguity doesn't correlate with hard positions about China. Support Israel, yes, but push a ceasefire, yes. Hard to do, but that's clearly where everybody is. And we may have contentions coming in Ukraine. We'll talk about imperialism. There's a little comment on being tough on China. That's the Tesla factory in Shanghai, actually owned to a bank, which is part of the Chinese government. Transmitted the technology for Chinese electric cars, which are now being exported all over the world. Musk has very good relations with Chinese officials. Tough on China? Well, that's the old Washington blob talking. Fearless prediction. And I mentioned Purdue. Spent most of his business career. He's the new ambassador. He replaces Nick Burns as a geopolitics and, traditional sort of, what should I say? See the world in terms of the clash of powers and competition and so on. He's not a warmonger, but he sees the world in those traditional. He's being replaced by Purdue. Spend his time outsourcing jobs. So there they go. The other thing about the United States that I find fascinating is that we have this economic boom and a civic boom. Okay. Energy producer, innovating tech, we've got population growth, unlike look at the chart of China. Our population isn't growing fast, and that may depend on how many immigrants come into the country in the next years or so, but it's basically, inching upward and will through the 20th century, according to all those demographers at the UN. 90% of international transactions are done in dollars. It's actually up a little bit 20 years ago. We have this full employment, and we have low inflation. Envy of the world. And then you look at legitimacy, public trust in government, and all the things that go with it, political polarization, that's dysfunction, welcoming the rioters from the Capitol as they get out of jail, and so what's going on here? I don't know, but something. Okay. We now live in a presidential autocracy. Trump is one of a breed. He's one of a species. And we're latecomers, not trendsetters to this species. These are the new 21st century, whatever you want to call it, populist autocrats, national conservative autocrats. And Trump really is an autocrat. Doesn't mean he's going to get away with autocracy. It's another issue, but he's an autocrat. But who won? Okay. And they all have, and by the way, you probably have fun with that, with the slide. Do you recognize them all? Well, we can come back to it at some point. But by the way, they span all the continents, this breed, which is really kind of interesting. It's not just a Western, an Asian, Latin American, or Middle Eastern thing. They're folks all over the place who are of this same species. So we'll look at the top row here. Modi, India, China, Putin. Along to the next row. Really people. Arabs. And they're all pretty similar in how they view things. And looks like this. And as I say, Trump, he just fits right in, all the rest of them. And they're all, there's some national variations. But the national variations aren't nearly as striking as the similarities. The real people, us, the nation, bonded with our leader, who solves our problems for us. I alone can do it. To uphold and preserve our national religion and traditional values. It's Islam in Saudi Arabia, it's Judaism in Israel, it's Orthodoxy in Russia, it's, God knows, Hinduism in India, and go burn down every Muslim shop you can find. Or we have our Christian nationalists. And who threatens this? Well, it's elites, it's the ruling class, it's politicians, it's the deep state, and it's all those LGBTQ people. Who, by the way, that is also a common feature. Almost every one of these folks really is on the get. It's unnatural, it's unhuman, it's against our religion, it's against whatever it is. And that's actually a commonality. And they've sold us out to immigrants, as well as gender nonconformists and elites who corrupt. The enemy within and the enemy outside. It's an old Stalin thing that was like an old Hitler thing. A lot of this. And we, of course, the real people, we're the majority. And by the way, elections are just great, just so long as the right people win. Oh, for it. Rights belong only to members of the capital P people, not to those other folks. No birthright citizenship, please. And I think this is really important, corruption is just fine. That's the way things are. We don't mind that the oligarchs get it all. Viktor Orban runs a show in which basically what he does is he extracts a lot of money from the EU, gives it to his cronies and his friends to keep them sweet, and, buys up the media and wins the next election. That's how he operates, along with all the rest of the ideology. Corruption, by the way, is a feature, not a bug, of these systems, because it's the way you can threaten people, pay to play. For my friends, everything. For my enemies, the law. Get them on tax fraud. Everybody's guilty of tax fraud, so you just choose who you go after. And that's very useful. Okay. Now let's go to Trump. Specifically, his worldview, his style. It's unilateral. He sees the United States. By the way, I'm contrasting Elon Musk. Elon Musk is a globalist. Yeah, he's got factories in China. He's building a big new factory in Germany, which he thinks gives him the right to mobilize his 200 million followers on X to go after the German politics in favor of the, basically sort of neo-Nazi and neo-communist East German AFD, which is doing reasonably well, but I don't think they're going to take over. The United States, this is not really a size, the only country in the entire quote unquote West, which has had a real takeover by one of these autocrat populist outfits like mine. We're the outlier. We're very exceptional. All the other parts of the West have managed to resist it and probably will keep on doing so. But anyway, the modus operandi, the MO, is very, very simple. You threaten somebody to get them to make a deal. I've seen it on full display in the last few days, the last couple of months. 25% tariffs on the Canadians, right? Threaten them, then you try to make a deal for whatever you want. And the whole world affairs is simply transactions for national advantage. It's bumper cars. And it's not alliances. There's no sense of ideology or history or bonds of traditional friendship that binds nations together. Just the way it's for chumps in business. Right? Democracy, human rights, forget it. You think in deals, not in strategy. Now that sounds obvious, but in fact, it's really important. Okay, let me unpack that. Everybody who does foreign policy, not just in my generation, but in Thucydides' generation, thinks in terms of strategy. The Spartans are going over here, so we got to get the Greek cities on our side, and then they're going to go. You think, and it generally connects up with terms, geopolitics. You can be Thucydides, you can be Louis XIV, you can be Napoleon, you can be Stalin or Hitler, you can be George H.W. Bush or Ronald Reagan or John Kennedy. And that's how you think about it. This is, the Chinese are trying to take over Eurasia, and will they continue to be in partnership with the Russians and all this stuff? Oh, now that's a very, very fundamental way of looking at things. And you can have your friends as well as you can have alliance. No. If you're simply in it to make a deal, which is a transaction, that's a totally different way of thinking. And so you get this culture club between Trump and the entire foreign policy establishment. It's really deep and it's really serious. And we'll see what happens. He had one of his first day orders is Marco Rubio, who, by the way, is a classic geopolitical international relations type. Who wants to track Ronald Reagan for better. Ronald Reagan is very close to John Kennedy, if you actually look at their worldview, various things. Orders to purge the State Department of all the people who don't want to slavishly follow or totally follow Mr. Trump's agenda. Well, I think that's called civilian control of the bureaucracy, and that's where we are. But anyway, now I'll do a little bit of an aside here. George Washington, in his farewell address, which is a document that everybody ought to read, had the following advice. Sounds a heck of a lot more like Trump than it does like John Kennedy or Ronald Reagan or George H.W. Bush, either George Bush. He said, no permanent friends and no permanent enemies. Stay out of other people's quarrels. If you're going to have to have a military at all, just use it for deterrence and defense. Don't go intervening. push commerce, promote trade, but have as little political connection with the rest of the world as possible. That was George's advice. It's not necessarily bad advice. Okay, it's not what we've been doing for the past 75 years. Well, one other thing about Trump, obviously he likes personal diplomacy. This is from the bad old days of the first term. It's much easier to make deals with autocrats. They can pledge their countries. You try to make a deal with Justin Trudeau or Emmanuel Macron or, Lula in Brazil, they can't tell their countries what to do. They have to go running back to legislatures, and they have all kinds of commitments to various factions of parties and democratic norms and courts and all the rest of it. We can't make a deal with those guys. Sit me down with somebody I can make a deal with. So of course he's going to favor autocrats, affinity with autocrats. He'll whisper to Netanyahu, he'll buddy with Putin, he'll declare Xi a great leader. I love this one. That's Trump and Melania sitting there listening to the Chinese opera from the last term. How many of you have ever sat to the Chinese opera? Anybody here? How many hours? 3, 4. Yeah, exactly. And okay, but at least I can make a deal with this guy, even if this stuff is really kind of boring. And then of course there's all the stuff you're going to throw overboard. Doesn't get you anything. It's not to your advantage. And I don't know how many of you picked up on this morning. One of the people he has now fired of the first 4 from various government boards and commissions is Jose Andres, person who developed the World Central Kitchen, going around the world trying to actually feed people. Now we don't need people like him. Get him out of here. He was buddying with Democrats. That really got me. That got me. Because one of the other things this country does is a great tradition of NGO, private, church-based, and government, but basically philanthropy and really wanting to help people out there. My mother, who grew up in Istanbul, Turkey, was a tremendous admirer of the American religious organizations that had founded schools and colleges. Including the University of Beirut, which produced many of the Arab nationalists, including Palestinians. But that's an old tradition. Totally, he's fine just trashing it. Makes me really mad. Help Ukraine against the fascists in Russia. They're democracy, they're resisting invasion. They tick all the boxes of that past old world. Doesn't matter, nothing in it for us. And by the way, it's their part of the world, they should control it. And you think about Taiwan, well, same thing, right? We'll get back to that at the end. Now, again, the contrast. This is old style national security. This is the National Security Act of 1947. Set up the structure for the Cold War. Basically hasn't changed, been modified, but basically hasn't changed since. Okay. And it's got the National Security Council, which, by the way, has pretty much taken over the functions of the old State Department. They're the guys, men and women, excuse me. I don't mean to use a male pronoun here. The people who make policy and to some extent carry it out. And the National Security Council, not the State Department, has now become pretty much a publicity and local contacts operation. Not all of it, and not everywhere, but nevertheless. Okay. State Department, the Defense Department, the CIA, the intelligence community, 18 agencies. She only runs one of them, assuming she's confirmed, whoever is confirmed. And the Treasury does its thing, and you've got the UN representative. By the way, she'll become like Secretary of State after Rubio quits and is fired in 6 months. Fearless prediction. And you always had the FBI. to check up on the internal side of all those foreign adversaries. Yeah, they were always there. In fact, they were there before the CIA. Now, try to redefine national security. What is national security? Well, it's the invasion of the border. It's deporting immigrant criminals. And by the way, immigrant criminals are a very interesting phrase. Does it mean that everybody who entered, quote unquote, illegally is a criminal? Or does it just mean people who actually commit crimes inside the United States? Totally ambiguous. We're going to army the southern border. We're going to go after the cartels. But where do they live? Cartels. Well, Mexico. They've been holding up in Ecuador recently, where I used to live, various places. That's interesting. I'm sure how to go after the cartels without going after the places where they are. And uproot gangs in the US. This is the concept of national security. Anywhere out there, like Ukraine or China, whatever, go make a deal, whatever, but it's not on our turf. And so you get the new key players, Stephen Miller, the White House, the Deputy Chief of Staff, and he's the immigration zealot. I'm the brain. Holman's who's doing border security. That's the enforcer. That's what Holman's technically works for Kristi Noem, if she's confirmed, Homeland Security, but he'll be the one in charge. Treasury, well, they're involved in deciding who a terrorist organization is. That's a function, believe it or not, of the Treasury Department that has a whole staff to go after anybody who's a terrorist, to try to dry up their finances and so on. That was an innovation of the war on terror, and it persists. And the Attorney General is responsible for the FBI, also for the Drug Enforcement Administration, and various other things where you're going to prosecute, and anti-immigration policies, and so on. Okay, that's national security. And you're going to repurpose a few. I just put my labels on them. The Department of Imperial Acquisitions and Harassment of Allies. Department of Border Defense and Invasions, and the Department of Tariffs. Okay. Hey, new world. Now, third part of this talk. What about democracy? What actually is going on? And, I don't totally have a crystal ball about that. But we can take a look and see what's happening in a few places. Now, the United States persists in the delusion that what the United States does guides and shapes what happens in other countries. How many people here have ever lived in other countries? I know a good many of you have. All right. Is that true? 95% of what happens in those countries happens because of what's going on in those countries, not because of anything having to do with the United States or any other foreign country. This is became very, very clear to me after living in a bunch of places and trying to figure out what exactly was going on. And the United States, has actually rather little power in a great many of these situations. And it's pretty obvious to everybody except the people who live in think tanks in Washington. Just consider the list of places in recent years where the United States hasn't gotten its way. Well, let's just list them all. List a few of them. Iran, we're supposed to all cave with sanctions and so on. Afghanistan, obviously. Venezuela. Cuba. Cuba's what now? 59, 60, 40, 66 years of sanctions. That's a long time. Yeah, still try. Buried. But it's always been buried. Iraq. I don't know what happened there. And some other things, getting NATO allies to increase their defense spending. Well, they did eventually. Now, because they feel really threatened by it, they would like to bail out Ukraine, and they're actually contributing a lot more money to that than we ever did, although we contribute advanced weapons to it until now. But they didn't pay any attention to all those presidents talking. I don't know, Reagan, everyone since, urging them to spend more money on defense. Russia, in the last few years, they were supposed to fold with sanctions like Iran, but they didn't. It was terrible, not just because of the sanctions, that's the Europeans. We're going to defend the South China Sea from China. No, China now controls. And I could go on and on with that list. Oh, Israel. The Biden administration spending years trying to get a ceasefire. Netanyahu finally agreed to a day or two before Trump came in, temporarily, playing with the situation. But the Israelis should do exactly what they've done. Please, that's perfectly clear. They control our policy more than the other way around. And if we go on to Ukraine, Trump tries to get a deal, he won't. He absolutely won't. Why won't he? Because Vladimir Putin is dug in. He has promised over and over that he's going to get Ukraine. The government is going to change. Russia is going to annex the southern half, most of which they don't yet control militarily. But they claim to annex it. Ukraine will become this neutral country with a pro-Russian government, and probably, by the way, the old government officials are going to be denazified, which means they're going to go to concentration camps. And Zelensky, if he chooses not to flee, will meet the same end as Alexei Navalny. Okay. I mean, the Russians are very clear about that. They don't make any bones about any of that. In fact, it's more. And as this happens, you Americans have to sit down with us and we have to redivide Europe, and you're going to get all of NATO in East Germany. That's their draft treaty of December 2021. No, that's what the Russians are, and Putin is now in it for at least 100,000 dead and probably a couple of 100,000 wounded, and a wartime economy and all the rest. Could he back down? Probably not keep control. And the Ukrainians, they're not going to quit. Huh? No way. And they're making most of their own weapons now. Whatever help they get from the Europeans, they just keep on going. And Trump's going to go there. He's going to say, well, you take this person, you're going to send somebody to Rubio or his friend, what's his name, Grenell, with that portfolio. Well, go and get him to make this deal. And people get into that frame of mind on both sides. Deals aren't. And so my fearless prediction for that one is just another in this long list of not getting our way. This is Trump's watch, is that, everybody will play nice and sort of like they're talking about 4 or 5 months, and then the United States will just have to go. That's a fearless prediction. They don't have, but I think it. Now, is democracy in the world going to collapse? Well, it hasn't in Europe. I keep talking about how it's going to for about 40 years, and it never quite does. In that period, this is from the Economist data, it's only the United States that's been losing its confidence in institutions for the last 15, 20 years. Actually, the United States goes back farther than that, but that's a whole other issue. Obviously, on the slide, the blue is full democracy. The lighter the blue, the shading, the yellows that's Hungary and Ukraine. And I'll get back to that point at the end. No country in wartime is going to be a democracy. Not going to be like that. And Turkey is authoritarian, which it is. But there's a whole lot of backsliding. In fact, you look at Europe. Poland had an election recently. The good guys won. And they're trying to uproot the entrenchment of the bad guys, Kaczynski's Law and Justice Party, in the courts, particularly in the media, and so on. It takes a lot of time, by the way, to really walk back from a rooted effort to create an autocracy. Where else? Well, keep saying, watch the German elections. That's not extremely important. I think the AfD, Elon Musk, or no Elon Musk, actually, Europeans are probably just going to get mad at the United States, and anybody that Musk or Trump supports are going to lose votes, not gain them. But we'll see. We'll see how that one comes out. That will be extremely important. Now, I'll try some other places. Here's my favorite case. Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil said, I'm the Brazilian Trump. And he did various things that the America First MAGA sort of thing. Go and pasture your cows and cut down the trees in the Amazon. Keep on with corruption except for my guys, all sorts of things. Look what happened in Brazil. Brazil is obviously a much more functioning democracy than the United States. They tried to overturn the election 2022, just like January 6th, a year earlier in the United States. Took to the streets, claimed it was fraudulent, demanded that there be, recounts and Bolsonaro continue in power and, whatever. The whole 9 yards. The hell. Eventually, they had to call it off. Lula became president. And then what? All the things that didn't happen here. Of course, banned Bolsonaro from politics. He was indicted for conspiracy to overthrow the election. And he now lives in Florida. Okay. Brazil might be a fun place to go. You're wrong. Oh my God. You see, a lot of formal democracy is one thing, but if what you're really looking for is popular resistance to tyranny and oppression, you're just then going to come out with a better system than the old one, and that system may be a little different depending on where you are. You've got lots of this going on. Hey, we're the religious police. Who's wearing a hijab these days? Forget it. Okay. Nasty military government in Myanmar. The various bunches of rebels now control most of the country, and the government is on life support, and the Chinese are playing both sides. As are the Thais, by the way. They're probably not going to. Well, Maduro hangs on in Venezuela, but he tried to arrest Gloria Machado, the leader who actually won the election last summer. He managed to arrest her for exactly 1 day. Popular pressure forced him to release her. I don't think this could go on much longer, unless the United States starts to intervene, at which point all the Venezuelans will get mad. Tell the Yankees to come on. Bangladesh. Sheikh Hasina, tyrant if there ever was one, ordered by the Indians next door. What the Russians call a color revolution took place. People got out on the streets and talked her out. And note, by the way, the regional bully lost their client. How about this one, right? Okay, now the folks who took over, it's not even clear exactly who, all the factions and so on. They're a bunch of Islamists. Once upon a time, long ago, they had some ties to Al-Qaeda. That's not where the action is at the moment. They're not extremists, haven't been. We'll see what happens. I don't think Syria is going to come out constitution, a Bill of Rights and all that stuff. No, they'll have some kind of a different system. Whatever it's going to turn out to be. And it'll have an influence of Islam, but it won't be, Islamic State version. Not by far. These guys are making nice to the various groups in Syria. Russians lost, the Turks won. And this is the best case of it. And this occurred after Trump was elected. President Yoon Suk-yeol, I think it is, but Yoon declared martial law December. I'm taking over. Just like General Park did in 1961, 20 years. His popularity had gone down. I'm not even sure what the specific issues were, but he basically just declared martial law. This country is now ruled by its army, which reports to me, period. Hundreds of thousands of people got in the streets. The Parliament, Korean National Assembly, met the next day, just basically pushing aside the soldiers who were half-heartedly trying to prevent them from meeting, voted to rescind the declaration of martial law. Yoon has now been arrested. Hey, they're working. Maybe we can go there instead of Brazil. Okay. So what's the point here? Well, the point is obviously that if you're looking at what's going on elsewhere, you really can't make an argument that, world autocracy or fascism or national populism or whatever is sweeping the world. It's not. Which, of course, then also goes back to the point that 95% of what happens in country X is pretty much what made it to country X. But it's not happening, and I don't think it's going to happen. The only place happening is here. Okay. Now, the last thing I want to do is spend a little bit of time, which is not about democracy at all. And I just latched onto this after I actually started pulling together ideas for this talk. And of course, now it's snowball rolling as fast as it can downhill, which is that the United States has now consciously, explicitly, evidentially adopted a policy of regional imperialism. The only word. Take back the Panama Canal. China controls it. By the way, most of you know what China actually controls. And China is that there's a Chinese company, which is one of the old big British Hong Kong conglomerates. It's been going ever since Hutchison Whampoa. They owned Cathay Pacific Airlines, among other things, but they still do, and so on. Big Taipan outfit. They own the ports at the two ends of the Panama Canal. So what? And then Chinese company owns the port of Piraeus near Athens. It's water. They have lots of ports. Okay. Well, that's the extent of Chinese involvement. And the Panamanians could, nationalize the ports and put another company in anytime they wanted to. They run the ports pretty well. Panama Canal makes lots of money. May have something to do with why wants to take it back. Anyway, and then he says, and this is back in December, I'm not ruling out military action. We need Greenland, security purposes, although it's kicking around under the ice, which is melting, Panama as well. And he's now threatened 4 democracies: Denmark, Mexico, Canada, and Panama. Hasn't threatened anybody else. Okay. So that's in future of Greenland. And so the New York Post puts up, now, is this a joke? Well, you'd think it was. Isn't. And that's typical Trump style, isn't it? You're not sure whether he's conning you or whether he's actually means it. He did say in his inaugural that he was renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. And I love Jeff Bezos. Now Zuckerberg, of course, Musk, and various others have gone and paid their obeisance to Trump. They're Trump deciding on Amazon, which owns, whether he's going to delete or save for later, or buy now, or whatever. Okay. We'll proceed. Okay. The one on the left, as you're looking at it, is on Trump's own Truth Social, webpage. I get that every day, by the way. That's how I learned this morning that Jose Andres had been fired. It was a, World Food Kitchen. No, why? Maybe his sin was that he tried to get a lot of food aid to Palestinians in Gaza. Really bombed the food aid. It didn't sit for it. But anyway, of course, Canada really did become not one state but six. That would end Republican MAGA political control. It has to be the one state. Maybe you could get away with it. Sure. So, okay. I'm going to use economic force. And in fact, this post is from a while back, but he said this morning that he is in fact going to put 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, probably around the 1st of February. Threats become deals, become transactions, become whatever. Okay? So this has been confirmed. He didn't say anything about tariffs on China. Okay. And he keeps referencing the McKinley era, 1896 to 1901. And it's wonderful to think about. Just check it out. Who was McKinley? He was a Republican president. He was a pal of oligarchs. Back in his day, corruption was a defining feature of government. So was a spoils system for government jobs. All that imperialism in the Caribbean, against Philippines, and Hawaii, it was all on McKinley's watch. Fought a counterinsurgency war in the Philippines, anti-immigration movement. We also became the world's largest economy and had lots of tariffs. And then the last part, which I find very fascinating. 6 months after his second term election, he was assassinated by a Polish anarchist in Buffalo, New York. I don't know if Trump was tracking that part or not. Now, go back to that era. I'm just going to end with a little bit. Go back to that era. A very strong anti-immigrant movement. This is a few years before McKinley was elected, but the sentiments and the movement and the ideology just kept going through that. And this is great. I put up the Library of Congress caption on this picture. It's called Where the Blame Lies, and it shows a retired justice of the U.S. Supreme Court telling Uncle Sam to keep all of those people out because the United States is a Christian nation. That goes. And you look carefully at this, and I won't try to read them all. These folks who, but they're sort of swarthy. That goes back too. There were hats that say things like Polish anarchist, British socialist, Italian mafia, criminals and deviants. And actually it's fun, and blow it up and see what the labels are. This is coming through Ellis Island with the Statue of Liberty in the back. And this is another one of the same ilk, that era. Kinley, this is 1899. We've got all the brown children in the front row of the schoolmaster, Uncle Sam, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, Philippines, and Cuba. They're all going to become part of the United States. You've got the black guy washing the window in the background. You've got the Chinese fellow meekly trying to get in through the door. And you've got the Native American of the dumpster. Oh, it's easy. You know, sometimes cartoons are fun, speak much more, much of other things. Well, here's again from that time, you know, we sent troops to Haiti, Dominican Republic, Cuba, where else? Nicaragua, of course, Panama, Mexico. Right. And here's Teddy Roosevelt, who became president when McKinley was assassinated. Vice president, rolling the banditos of Colombia so we could take Panama. Say, cheering in the background and sitting on a warship with his big stick. Philippines, well, you know, they resisted. They helped throw out the Spanish and then resisted the Americans. And we took care of them. Oh, did we take care of them? You think any of this stuff was new? The war on terror? Check it. Counterinsurgencies are nasty. Well, this Trump, we're going to have the greatest military ever. More money into it. Which, by the way, is to be used to intimidate. That's not necessarily the same thing as you're actually going to get it to fight a war. You're going to use it to intimidate people. And yeah, let's do a little peacemaking. This is Teddy Roosevelt ending the Russo-Japanese War. The New Hampshire, 1905. But that's far away. Russians are far away. Japanese are far away. You know, one day. This is another. And then finally, a little later, they invaded Mexico. President orders General Pershing, who then was sent the next year or so, France, organized American Expeditionary Corps in Europe, invade Mexico. Note, by the way, on the far side here, the paper, he was president. To be ignored if he protests. Okay. So, go track William McKinley. Go for it. Besides, everybody deserves a secure neighborhood. We're all for secure neighborhoods. You know? And by the way, I put that on the bottom. We could add to this a couple more on. Iran's Khamenei and the Revolutionary Guard want to take over their neighborhood, various proxies and all the rest of it. And probably I'd add Benjamin Netanyahu has now sent the Israeli forces into Lebanon, into Syria, not just into Gaza. He certainly wants to control the neighborhoods. People trying to control neighborhoods. I could also have added Narendra Modi of India. Here's another feature, not a bug of these guys. He's trying to control Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Kashmir, and you know, the Indians are throwing their weight around in their own immediate neighborhood too. A whole lot, all that. Okay. So, do we deserve a secure neighborhood? Well, Mr. Trump says yes. And my real worry, actually, is not that all the countries in the world are going to go stampeding into dictatorships. No, I don't think there's any chance of that at all. I want to. In fact, there's a lot more push against that than there's push for it. My real worry is that we're going to slip into an era of, right, imperialism is just normal and fun and fine. The best quote is the one from Thucydides: the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. Thucydides wasn't in favor of this, but he was sure describing the world he lived in. Maybe this is what we now stand for. And how will the rest of the world react? We don't know. We do know, though, that if you have an era of imperialism and invasion and aggression and conquest are attempted, so both the oppressors and the victims have to organize something that looks like a democracy just to resist it. That's why Ukraine isn't blue on the map of Europe. That's why during World War II, the United States was a socialist country in which the government defined who was going to be in the military. Women went to work, factories, or it's either riveted. Prices were controlled. Production was allocated among companies. We essentially had a mobilized socialist economy fueled by intense work. Just go look at the United States. Maybe the best. But that's what awesome. This is what happens in war. Inevitably. Well, I don't know how the rest of the world will react. There's the new president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum. I'm pointing to her map of Mexican America, not American Mexico. And obviously the Canadians and the Panamanians and various others. The Danes haven't responded yet. Nobody's put tariffs on them. But the Danes are the EU and they're also NATO. Interesting. And that's true of Canada as well. Oh, I'll leave it there. Let's have a conversation.
I'm confused about Trump's relationship with Elon Musk.
Oh, Elon Musk. Well, we're all confused about that. We have no idea. Now, what do I think about Elon Musk? And I don't necessarily think any more fundamentally about it than any of you. All right. Here's a guy who thinks he is the Nietzschean Superman of all time. Not only can he not be constrained, he clearly has no time for ordinary mortals. Yeah. Musk will own Mars. Musk will dabble in politics all over the world. Musk will invent things. He is a superior being. That's what I see Elon Musk. Now, you put that together with Trump, and I have no idea. I do will make a very actually easy fearless prediction that there are going to be an awful lot of people in the Trump administration who aren't going to want Elon Musk around. Now, if he leaves, what will he then do? He actually, in some ways, is more powerful than Trump. He has 200 million followers on his social media. That's more than the number of people who worship Trump. He is the world's richest man. A few billion here and there is pocket change. And you can spend it in all kinds of ways. This could get really interesting. And that's about as far as I go. What the rest of you think?
But he wants our money. Well, the rockets to the Mars.
Well, yeah, he maybe would want our money, and he'll be happy to do it. And Trump mentioned that in his inaugural. He gave a little shout out to Mars on the way by. There's a wonderful one. Here, sent me the Borowitz report today. We're all colonizing Mars, and we want Elon to be the first to go.
Yes, it's my understanding that Musk's first wife so that he created his own reality. He's trying to become that reality. And on top of that, since he's got the contracts with the government, for the spaceships, he's got the internet worldwide, and the car company, a few other things. He's also probably very involved with the United States or the government to control the economics for his business.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that Musk knows how to play Trump.
Yeah.
And get what he wants.
I will not disagree with it. I'll be what happens. But all, if it does, see, now how many of the people who voted for Trump, or how many people in the country as a whole that didn't vote for Trump, would be happy if Elon Musk become the public minister? Steve Bannon, he didn't win the other. He's total bugger. What did he say about Elon Musk? He says this guy is dangerous. And then he made a comment that was really good. He said white South Africans are the most racist people on earth. That's Ben. That's quote. And Musk is, of course, a South African. Made his money in tech, PayPal, went on there. I don't know if he was ever undocumented at any. Whatever. He's pushing HB1 visas and HB10 and the rest of no one goes to that. So no idea what's going to happen. It's going to be a fun show to watch, and it could be a dangerous show.
What role do you see international law taking, given the ignorance or ignorance of international law in the Middle East?
Irrelevant.
Yeah.
Gone. An old world. Yeah, I think it will revive. Because you can't run the world without some rules. But I think we're going to see a whole lot of, whatever you call it, chaos, being, dust ups before it does. I mean, that's maybe a stupidly simple answer, but that goes along. Now, the interesting point on me is that you can't run a world economy with rules. And it may not be the traditional quote unquote international law like the UN Convention on Refugees or whatever. But it is commercial international law. Rules, and if nobody plays by those rules, it's not clear what's going to happen to the commerce that makes a whole lot of people their money. We live in an integrated global economy that hasn't gone away. Trump can't wish it away. Something Elon Musk understands a lot better than Trump does. He's one of the kingpins of it international. So I don't know. I would look there because really
Yes, I have one last question.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Very, very, very enlightening. Tell me, what do you think will be the big buzz at Davos this year? What's going to happen there?
You'll be the big buzz. The election of Donald Trump was the most important thing that happened in the world in the last, well, certainly since the Russian invasion of Ukraine and maybe since before that. So they'll all be talking about it. Now the question is, what will the Americans at Davos be thinking or saying? No, I'm going to watch it. See what comes out of Davos. See, there'll be a whole lot of Trump going on. Oh, no, the United States isn't going to be something different. Well, but one of the candidates for leader of the Liberal Party in Canada, Trudeau's party, they'll probably lose to the Conservatives. That's Art Carney. Art Carney used to run the Bank of Canada. He also used to run the Bank of England. And I suspect if he's not at Davos, he's totally of that group. What can he say these days?
That's not giving the bell tolls.
Okay,
I love that.
thank you so much. We really appreciate your. Wow. Some water?
Oh, is that okay? Well, you know, the human being. The historian of the science of it.
How to find hope, I guess that's the question.
Lots of hope.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Where do you find hope? That's a good question.
I find hope in a whole lot of things. You know, instead of having a free country.